welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Well, we have a packed show for you. Just ahead of the G20 summit, we had the ASEAN-India Summit in Indonesia. Let's bring you a complete lowdown on that. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the ASEAN Summit in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta today, terming the grouping of Association of Southeast Asian Nations a central pillar of India's Act East policy. The Prime Minister emphasized on its role in India's Indo-Pacific strategy. He underlined India's full support for ASEAN centrality and called for ensuring a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. The Prime Minister met leaders of the 10-member bloc at the ASEAN-India Summit. He said, and I quote, ASEAN is the central pillar of India's Act East policy. India fully supports ASEAN centrality and ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN holds a prominent place in India's Indo-Pacific initiative. Last year, we celebrated the India-ASEAN Friendship Year and elevated our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Terming the 21st century as Asia's century, Prime Minister Modi said, today, even in an environment of global uncertainties, there is continuous progress in every field in their mutual cooperation. This is testament to the strength and resilience of our relationship. The theme of this year's ASEAN Summit is ASEAN Matters, epicentrum of growth. ASEAN matters because here everyone's voice is heard, and ASEAN is the epicenter of growth because the ASEAN region plays a crucial role in global development. He said, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. This sentiment is the theme of India's G20 presidency as well. The 21st century is Asia's century. It is our century. For this, it is necessary to build a rule-based post-COVID world order and all efforts for human welfare. He said, the progress of a free and open Indo-Pacific and elevating the voice of the global South is in the common interest of all. I believe that these discussions will lead to new resolutions for strengthening the future of India and the ASEAN region. Our partnership is entering its 4th decade. Our history and geography connect India and ASEAN, along with shared values, regional unity, peace, prosperity and a shared belief in a multipolar world also binds us together. Now, the Prime Minister's remarks assume significance amid growing concerns among ASEAN members over China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea, an important trade corridor in which several member nations have claims that conflict with Beijing's. The term ASEAN centrality calls for the dominant Southeast Asian platform to overcome common challenges and engage with external powers. Prime Minister Modi's strong remarks came a day after China warned against a new Cold War in ASEAN. The Prime Minister said the need of the hour is in Indo-Pacific, where international law applies equally to all countries. The current global scenario is surrounded by difficult circumstances and uncertainties. Terrorism, extremism and geopolitical conflicts are big challenges for all of us. On Wednesday, addressing the summit, the Chinese Premier Li Qiang said, it is important to avoid a new Cold War when dealing with conflicts between countries. He said countries needed to appropriately handle differences and disputes. At present, it is very important to oppose taking sides, block confrontation and a new Cold War, he said. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi called for multilateralism and rules-based international order and said these are important to face various global challenges. The Prime Minister also announced the establishment of an ASEAN-India Fund for a digital future aimed at enhancing financial connectivity between ASEAN and India. The question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is, just how relevant is ASEAN on the present geopolitical landscape? Can it counter China's bullying tactics and expansionism? And what does the existence of this bloc mean for today's multilateralism, with many emphasizing on the need for the construct itself to undergo some much needed reform?
हमारी हिस्ट्री और ज्योग्राफी भारत और आसियान को जोड़ते हैं। साथ ही साझा वैल्यूज, क्षेत्रीय एकता, शांति, समृद्धि और मल्टीपोलर वर्ल्ड में साझा विश्वास भी हमें आपस में जोड़ता है। आसियान भारत की एक्ट ईस्ट पॉलिसी का केंद्रीय स्तंभ है। भारत आसियान सेंट्रलिटी और इंडो पैसिफिक पर आसियान के आउटलुक का पूर्ण समर्थन करता है। भारत के इंडो पैसिफिक इनिशिएटिव में भी आसियान क्षेत्र का प्रमुख स्थान है। पिछले वर्ष हमने भारत आसियान फ्रेंडशिप ईयर मनाया और आपसी संबंधों को एक कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप का रूप दिया। योर मैजेस्टी, एक्सेलेंसीज, आज वैश्विक अनिश्चितताओं के माहौल में भी हर क्षेत्र में हमारे आपसी सहयोग में लगातार प्रगति हो रही है। इस वर्ष की आसियान समिट की थीम है आसियान मैटर्स, एपिसेंट्रम ऑफ ग्रोथ। आसियान मैटर्स क्योंकि यहां सभी की आवाज सुनी जाती है, और आसियान इज एपिसेंट्रम ऑफ ग्रोथ क्योंकि वैश्विक विकास में आसियान क्षेत्र की अहम भूमिका है। वसुधैव कुटुंबकम, वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर की यही भावना भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता की भी थीम है। योर मैजेस्टी, एक्सेलेंसीज, 21वीं सदी एशिया की सदी है, हम सबकी सदी है। इसके लिए आवश्यक है कि हम एक रूल्स बेस्ड पोस्ट कोविड वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर का निर्माण और मानव कल्याण के लिए सबका प्रयास, फ्री और ओपन इंडो पैसिफिक की प्रगति में और ग्लोबल साउथ की आवाज को बुलंद करने में हम सबके साझे हित है।
All right, for more on this story, let's now go across to Ramakrishna Sridharan, our consulting editor, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Also joining us on the show tonight is Ambassador Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat. A warm welcome to both of you. Ambassador Seth, let me ask you first. You know, the Prime Minister there referred to the theme of the ASEAN Summit this time, which essentially said ASEAN matters. So let's take a step back and let me ask you the most fundamental question. Why does ASEAN matter?
For India particularly, ASEAN holds a great deal of importance because it is very much an element of our Act East, Look East, Act East policy. And it is also an important sort of connect in the Indo-Pacific. And for India, both the Indo-Pacific and our Northeast and the connectivity with our Act East policy are very important. And ASEAN matters not only in that aspect, but also because it plays an important role in ensuring that, it should play an important role in ensuring the free lines of, sea lines of communication and open and free Indo-Pacific. To what extent it is able to ensure it is a little, not clear. But given China's sort of stance there and continuously making, inroads and claims onto territory belonging to ASEAN countries, and as it has been doing in the rest of the world, I think they're trying, and also their debt trap policy has also become it's quite active. Even in ASEAN countries. And many of the ASEAN countries are trying to get out of it, but it's not going to be easy because the way China has been functioning there, it has made them extremely dependent on China, and they find it very difficult to break out of that. And ASEAN matters, ASEAN centrality matters, including in all the outreach in the East Asia Summit, India-ASEAN summits, and all the other individual country summits. ASEAN has to play a central role, and it is an important organization which has been very effective in ensuring that ASEAN's voice and ASEAN's collaboration, cooperation amongst themselves has been very, very positive and has helped all the ASEAN countries to achieve a certain level of development, a certain level of progress, and to interact with the rest of the world on their terms. Neha.
All right. Shri, let me come to you now. These days, we can't seem to do a single show without discussing China's bullying tactics and expansionism. So here we are once again referring to the elephant in the room. Now, you know, the Prime Minister, among many things, said this, and I want to quote him here for the viewers. He said, the need of the hour is an Indo-Pacific where international law applies equally to all countries. I think no prizes for guessing that the reference is to China, given that a lot of ASEAN members, have claims that conflict with those of China in the South China Sea. But here's what is truly interesting. The Chinese premier who represented his country at the ASEAN Summit said, at present it is very important to oppose taking sides, block confrontation and a new Cold War. What exactly is he referring to here?
Well, Neha, when our Prime Minister talks about the need for a world order which is rules-based, especially in the post-COVID world, his messaging has been very consistent. And unfortunately, the repeat offender, is China. Even in this case of, let's say, the South China Sea, where China has laid claims on large parts of territorial waters based on its historical, claims. Now, in 2016, an arbitration court in the Netherlands had shot down China's claim, saying that historical, history cannot be the basis for claims in the current situation. So similarly, there are n number of UN brokered treaties, deals, agreements, which China simply refuses to, accept and agree. So that really is the problem which, faces this part of the world, Neha. And the unfortunate bit for ASEAN countries, as they mull their own relevance, does ASEAN matter? As they grapple with that question, they have to contend with the fact that as far as their trade, the economic livelihood, their future, their day-to-day, earning of bread is concerned, China is extremely important. China, for most of them, is the biggest trading partner, the most important partner. But, for everything else, for their own territorial security, their integrity, they need someone like a US to stand by them. Now, if ASEAN was, effective in what it was, set up to do, then, we probably wouldn't need something like a Quad to come up, which basically puts ASEAN at the center. If you look at the geographic, spread of the participants of the Quad, you have Australia in south, there's Japan to the east, India to the north, and US to the west. So you have ASEAN sitting in the middle of all these four countries. Now, there are two big problems which ASEAN grapples, Neha, as it contemplates its own relevance. One is the consensus-based mechanism on which its constitution is important. I'm not saying that ASEAN countries are not. They're extremely important, which is why probably there's a need to evolve a framework, a mechanism where ASEAN is able to work better with countries like India and US. And therefore, this whole rules-based world where countries work within the framework of large multilateral institutions and respect that happens.
I'm very glad you brought up Myanmar, because I, in fact, wanted to raise a question on this very aspect. So let me go back to Ambassador Seth at this point. Ambassador Seth, ASEAN is a 10-member alliance or bloc. It represents over 650 million people and collectively boasts of the world's 5th largest economy. Now, if you look at those numbers, you would think, of course, this is an important grouping. However, as has been pointed out by Shri, here lies the rub. Former Indonesian Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa acknowledged during the ASEAN Summit that the grouping is actually struggling to convince world leaders that it deserves to play a central role in the region. These are his words. And he talked about how ASEAN's emphasis on unity and non-interference sometimes hinders its response to internal crises like the situation in Myanmar that Sri just referred to. And therefore, one is constrained to ask, are there not some question marks hanging over the relevance of this grouping?
I wouldn't put it as a question mark, but yes, it does hinder their full effectiveness in achieving what they set out to do. And especially in the case of Myanmar, I think it has become, though they did try, they did send there was the UN, ASEAN emissary was sent, and they tried to make some kind of have a dialogue with Aung San Suu Kyi and others, and to find a resolution to the issues there. But I think it was not effective because Myanmar, I think Myanmar's approach has been that it wants to be part of ASEAN, but wants to chart its own course and doesn't want to really have any pressure put on it, because it feels that ASEAN is also acting under pressure from the US and from the other countries. So I think that is another issue which has hindered full potential, achieving full potential by the ASEAN grouping in all its missions and its objectives. But it is not, we cannot say it is irrelevant. It is, as mentioned by Mr. Sri also, it is a very important grouping. It is at the center of, of the Indo-Pacific, and Indo-Pacific strategy has to take into consideration the ASEAN countries. So its relevance is very important for the rest of the world, and even for themselves. The fact that they've been together for so long and have a vision for their, moving forward, a vision to achieve certain level of progress, certain level of, prosperity and economic growth, which they're already the 5th largest grouping. But at the same time, they understand the constraints, and I think it will be not very easy for them to overcome these strains, and they have to emphasize and define their objectives and make themselves more effective in resolving intra-ASEAN matters as well, and not ignore them or not let them fester.
Okay, Sri, let me come back to you. Now, the Prime Minister said that, ASEAN is a central pillar of India's Act East policy and emphasized understandably on its role in India's Indo-Pacific strategy. So, I could ask you to put this into perspective for our viewers. Why is India's relationship with ASEAN important, and can ASEAN really counter China's hegemony? Even though the Prime Minister has said that international law needs to apply equally to all, and as I said earlier, there are conflicting claims in the South China Sea between China and some of the other members of ASEAN. But ASEAN, is it really in a position to do that? How do you look at it?
Right. So, very simple, Neha. ASEAN is important for us, not just from an economic trading point of view, but also geopolitically. It is very much part of the global South voice that Prime Minister Modi himself has championed at multiple fora, including BRICS, including G20. So, we do see, India does see ASEAN countries as our very, very important strategic and economic partners. There is no doubt about it. Now, you ask me the question of whether ASEAN countries themselves can stand up to China. I don't think so at all that's going to happen, Neha, because even, countries which are directly being impacted by China, they are struggling to make their voice heard for the reason that I mentioned, which is that their overwhelming dependence on China for everything economic. So they have to walk the line very carefully. And if you read the statement and the, speech made by the Chinese Premier Li Qiang, it's very clear. He's saying that as long as you guys don't, align with some powers, then, China will allow peace to be maintained this, in this region. Now, that's almost to my mind, the way I read it is, it's a veiled threat. He's literally telling them that, you guys stay out of this. There's a fight that's happening between, China and largely US, and then maybe a power like India. So China is like dismissive essentially of these countries. It has repeatedly, provoked them. Philippines, for example, has been at the receiving end. They have problems with Malaysia. So every country has an issue with China in that region. And China is just not willing to play ball. And as long as that situation prevails, Neha, I don't think it's possible for these countries. It's realistic on their part for them to stand up to China. China is a giant. It's it's a military superpower, it's the second most powerful, economically. It's not possible for these guys. So they need the support of someone like a US, someone like an India to be able to at least have a chance, of getting some sort of fair treatment, and the weight of, multilateral mechanism, institutional framework to be brought to their equation with China.
Well, I certainly agree with you there that, it is very difficult for these relatively smaller nations to take on the might of a country like China. Before we look at the larger issue of multilateralism and how it's evolving in the current times, Ambassador Seth, I want to quickly draw your attention to the trade that exists between India and ASEAN countries, because it is, of course, important geopolitically, as she said, but it's also very important from the trade standpoint. Now, India-ASEAN trade was worth $131.5 billion in 2022-23, with the 10-member bloc accounting for more than 11% of India's total trade for that period. And now the two sides are actually reviewing some of the agreements that they've had in order to facilitate their trade going forward and to address the asymmetries that exist. How do you look at the trade relationship between India and ASEAN countries?
As you mentioned, it is 121 billion, but it needs to be much more, given that there are a lot of synergies between the two countries, between India and the ASEAN grouping. But the grouping, as mentioned again by Mr. Sri, it is very heavily dependent on China for their trade, for manufacturing, for many things. Its economies, ASEAN economies are very intricately linked with China, and not that integrated with the Indian economy. And I think we are trying to make that happen through our northeastern states, to see whether we can have more border trade, we can have more sea trade from there, and have connectivity to it, and in tourism as well. Though it is not directly trade, but it is also helps to integrate the economies further. So trade in itself, we need to scale up, but I think need to look at new areas. The free trade agreement is being discussed still. I think that it has not been finalized, but at the same time, we have to ensure that we diversify the trade basket. And look at also joint ventures, including, now, since we have given a push to Make in India in many sectors, and also in the digital infrastructure. That is another portion, another element that we could add to our trade by, and the services part as well, services sector. So there is a lot of scope, but it needs to be leveraged by both sides and to be enhanced by both sides.
In fact, Prime Minister Modi has announced the establishment of an ASEAN-India Fund for Digital Future, which is aimed at exactly what you're referring to, enhancing financial connectivity between ASEAN and India. But Shri, would you say we have a long way to go as far as, breaking this China monopoly is concerned? The kind of integration that exists currently between these countries in China economically in terms of trade. We do have a lot of ground to cover there, don't we?
Absolutely, Neha. See, China is going to be a source of constant friction for us geopolitically. And that's going to spill over into all our economic relations also, unfortunately, where China feels that India could be a threat. So China is going to be a huge factor for us, no matter what we try and do. But I think if we approach these countries as we do, from a spirit of true partnership, and from a collective, shared vision for growth and prosperity, and with a, gesture of helping them, improving in areas where they are weak. For example, Prime Minister Modi's made the offering on the digital front. I mean, Singapore is already using our UPI, system. So it's integrating with India's UPI system to make payments. So if we are able to take these countries along with us, especially on the technology front, where India is very strong on the IT front, I think it will be possible for us to forge meaningful economic relations that just go beyond import of commodities and agricultural produce from these countries into something more meaningful, Neha.
All right. Final question to both of you before we wrap up this discussion. Ambassador, say to you first. I want to take this opportunity to also look at the larger issue of multilateralism. For example, just a few days ago in an interview to PTI, the Prime Minister said, something that India has spoken of for years now, that the United Nations Security Council, for example, is an institution that desperately needs modernization and reform, and that, of course, would mean expansion of the body to include more permanent members, including a country like India. That has not happened. It's a long pending demand that India has. If you look at a grouping like SARC, I think most would agree it's all but dead in the water, primarily thanks to, the dispute between India and Pakistan. In that context of multilateralism, the way it exists today, in today's fast evolving geopolitical scenario, what would you say about a bloc like ASEAN? You have so many other groupings that have come up in recent times, from Quad to AUKUS. Where does multilateralism really stand today? Is it serving the purpose that it is truly meant to?
It is still a work in progress, a smaller groupings that is. But of course, the UN, as far as the UN goes, it totally reflects, post World War II situation, and does not reflect the current reality, and it has to reform. Primarily, I think because the UN did not or was not able to meet its objectives everywhere across the world, and it was dominated by the P5 and their sort of agenda setting, and by their interests, it has reached the stage where it is almost irrelevant. And that is one of the reasons why so many other multilateral smaller blocs have come in across the world, where these countries feel that their interests and their working together will enhance their interests, or will promote their interests and the well-being of that particular grouping. As far as SARC goes, yes, it is. Pakistan has been, has not been agreeing to, or has not been an active member, and India-Pakistan dispute has come into it, though it was meant not to, allow any bilateral disputes to hinder its progress. It was a very good sort of multilateral organization, but to begin with. But I think because of the dispute, it became it's become sort of moribund. But other organizations, other multilateral organizations like ASEAN, like BRICS, like all the others, they see value in it because of the fact that the UN was unable to meet or to address the aspirations and the common threats which the world was facing, common challenges, including G20 also has come up, because I think partly because of that. And G7, of course, was a different, a different agenda. So there are many multilateral organizations that have come up over the years, and some have progressed because if they remain relevant and if they are able to meet the aspirations of the member countries, they would remain relevant. Otherwise, if they are not able to address those challenges or those aspirations, they will slowly fade out, in my view.
Okay, that's interesting. It's also an important warning. So, Shri, let me ask you this question, a larger question about multilateralism. Everyone seems to think, yes, the United Nations has failed the world. If you talk about a grouping like the G7, it is, of course, controlled completely by the richest and the most privileged countries in the world. SARC, like I said, is all but dead in the water. But then you have a BRICS, you have a G20. India is set to host the G20 summit this weekend. We've just had ASEAN in Indonesia. There are other smaller groupings such as Quad and AUKUS that have come up just in the last couple of years. The question is, are these multilateral forums, according to you, serving the purpose that they're meant to?
So, Neha, what's happening is that the world is changing very rapidly. And unfortunately, the multilateral institutions that we have set up historically haven't reinvented themselves to keep pace with these changes. But that said, I do believe that there is room for mega multilateral institutions and then minilateral institutions. Because, not all issues need to be taken up at a global level. There are certain regional interests which can be worked upon by regional countries without taking up the time of international community, unless, of course, it's a strategic issue. There is like security, safety, which puts the whole humanity at risk. If those kind of issues are involved, they can be taken to a multilateral institution. But by and large, I think there is room for coexistence of a multilateral institution, let's say like BRICS, G20, or even the UN, with different agendas, and smaller minilateral organizations like ASEAN. The only thing that all conveners and organizers of these institutions need to keep in mind is that they stay relevant. I think the risk comes when we don't make sure that these institutions are also moving in time and responding to the changes that are happening around the world, and therefore always equipped to deal with the new challenges which are being thrown either at the global level or at the regional level, Neha.
Well, so that's the million-dollar question. Will these institutions be able to adapt to the changing times and cater to the needs of a new world order? On that note, Ambassador Seth and Shri, thank you so much for joining me in this segment. I will say thank you to Ambassador Seth, who's leaving us now, but she stays on with us. Time for us to take a quick break, but there's lots more on the other side, including all the G20 action. Don't go away.
With all this gear, you must be wondering if I'm climbing a mountain. Well, let me give you a wider look of this place. This is Asia's largest mountain of shame.
A mountain of waste, almost the height of the Qutub Minar.